in the file called Gold and Inflation Template, we're given information on gold returns as well as inflation. The values for the returns for gold are our X values in regression, and the inflation figures are the Y values. Now we're going to run simple linear regression, and it says using an alpha of 5% to determine if gold is a leading indicator of inflation. It says also the data below is set up to have a lead of 1 year. So in other words, that means that the 13.58% for next year's inflation is actually for the year 1980, and that corresponds in our regression to the return on gold of 100.24% for the year 1979. So in Excel, I'm going to go to the Data tab, and in the Data tab, or under the Data tab, I'm going to find Data Analysis. And when I click on Data Analysis, I'm going to have a window appear, and I'm going to bring this over into view right now. This window appears like this, and I'm going to scroll down until I find the option for regression. I'm going to double click on regression, and then I have this window appear. It asks for the input Y range and the input X range. Now remember, as I just said, the inflation figures are our Y values. So here I am going to click on cell C13, hold the Control and Shift keys down, and while I'm holding those down, tap once on the down arrow. That will select all of the values for Y, including the label. Then I'm going to put my cursor in the field where it says Input X range. I'm going to scroll back up to where I can see cell B13 where it says gold, and I'm going to click on that cell B13. Once again, hold the Control Shift arrows down, and while I have those down, tap once on the down arrow to select the entire range for X. Then I'm going to check the box next to the word labels. Then I'm going to come down here, click in the radio button next to the output range, put my cursor. It's important, the next thing you do is put your cursor in that field next to the words output range. And then I am going to select a cell, and I'm going to select cell E14. Now the cell that I select here is going to be the uppermost left corner of the output, the regression output. So I'm going to click OK. And when I click OK, I have all of my regression output. You don't see all of that on the screen right now, but let me scroll over so that it comes into view. And there we have the output for regression. Now, there are some important figures to look at here. First of all, the value under significance F. I'm going to format that as a percent, and I'm going to show 2 digits after the decimal point. That is our p-value for the regression model. In other words, we are going to compare that value to our alpha. And remember, our alpha is 5%. What does alpha mean? Well, you could say this. Alpha is the percentage of time you're willing to make a mistake or willing to be wrong. The computer is telling us that if we reject the null hypothesis, that we will be wrong 1.3% of the time. And in regression analysis, the null hypothesis is that X and Y are not related. It's important that you understand that. The null hypothesis is that X and Y are not related. That means that the alternative, or the research hypothesis, is that X and Y are related. All right, so because the p-value is less than 5%, which is our alpha, I am going to reject the null. And by rejecting the null, I'm saying that I found sufficient statistical evidence to support my alternative or research hypothesis. In other words, I found sufficient evidence to support the statement that X and Y are related, or put in the words of the problem, that the return on gold and next year's inflation figure are related. All right, now once again, I made that determination because the significance F here, 1.3%, is less than my alpha, which is 5%. The question then says, in the problem, it asks us to describe the correlation between gold and next year's inflation. Well, the multiple R in your regression output, and I'm going to change that to 2 digits after the decimal point, the multiple R is the correlation coefficient. Notice that it's 0.46, but it's also important that you understand that in Excel, when you run regression, that figure for multiple R will always be positive, whether or not the actual correlation is positive or negative. You need to look to the slope coefficient, which in this problem is right down here. I put the cursor right there. This is my slope coefficient for the regression line, and it is a positive figure. That tells me that the correlation coefficient is a positive 0.46. So in other words, there is a positive correlation between the return on gold for a year and the next year's inflation. The next question then says, approximately how much of the change in next year's inflation can be explained by changes in gold returns? Well, I'm going to look to the adjusted R here for that, and I'm going to format that as a percent, 18%, and on the screen that is in cell F19. So that tells me that approximately 18% of the change in next year's inflation can be explained by changes in the returns of gold for that previous year.